When ladies and gentlemen, quish, today we gather to talk about something that touches every single one of us. How to break reactive patterns. Relinquish. We all know what it feels like to be caught in that cycle, quish, where a situation triggers us, we react without thinking, relinquish. And then later we wonder why we did what we did, relinquish. Reactive patterns are those automatic responses shaped by our past experiences, quish, when emotions and habits, they are often born out of conditioning, quish, sometimes from childhood, sometimes from repeated stress, quish, sometimes simply from survival mechanisms we've learned along the way, quish. But the truth is, while they may have served a purpose in the past, relinquish, they can often hold us back in the present, quish. The first step toward breaking any reactive pattern is awareness. Without awareness, quish, we are like passengers on a train that we did not choose to board, quish, speeding toward a destination we never intended, relinquish. Becoming aware means catching ourselves in the moment, feeling the tightness in our chest, quish, or noticing the quickening of our words, quish, observing the flood of emotion before it takes control, relinquish. Awareness is not about judgment, it's about recognition. When we become aware, quish, we create a small space between the trigger and the reaction, relinquish. When in that space lies the power to choose, now awareness alone is not enough, quish. We must learn to pause. Pausing is one of the most powerful tools we have, quish. A pause allows the rational mind to catch up with the emotional mind, relinquish. It gives us the opportunity to ask ourselves, am I reacting out of habit, relinquish? Or am I responding with intention? That simple pause can be the difference between escalating an argument and resolving it, quish, between closing off and opening up, between regret and growth, relinquish. Breaking reactive patterns also requires us to understand the emotional loops that drive them, relinquish. Often, we react because an old wound has been touched, quish. Maybe it's criticism that reminds us of a past failure, quish. Maybe it's rejection that echoes an old fear of not being enough, quish. When we trace these patterns back, relinquish, we begin to see that our reactions are not always about the present moment. They are about unhealed parts of ourselves, quish. By doing the work to heal, whether through reflection, journaling, quish, or even professional help, quish, when we free ourselves from the grip of those old emotional loops, quish, once we have awareness and the ability to pause, quish, we must take the next step, shifting from reaction to response, relinquish. Where response is deliberate, it comes from clarity, not impulse. Relinquish. It is not about suppressing emotions, but about expressing them in a way that aligns with our values. To respond instead of react is to take ownership of our choices, to say, relinquish. I am not a slave to my impulses. I am the author of my actions. This shift transforms not only how we handle conflict, but also how we show up in relationships, in work and in life. To truly break reactive patterns, we must also replace them with new habits, It's not enough to just stop doing something, relinquish. We must start doing something better, This could mean practicing mindful breathing when we feel anger rising, choosing gratitude when disappointment creeps in, or setting boundaries when we sense overwhelm. Over time, these small, deliberate practices become our new default. The brain rewires, The old patterns lose their grip, and we begin to live from a place of greater freedom. Finally, sustaining this growth requires commitment, Breaking reactive patterns is not a one-time event. It's a lifelong practice, There will be times we slip back into old habits, and that's okay, The key is not perfection, but persistence. By practicing mindfulness, reflecting regularly, and surrounding ourselves with people who encourage our growth, relinquish. We create an environment that supports change, relinquish. And every time we succeed in breaking a reactive pattern, relinquish. We reinforce the truth that we are capable of more, relinquish. That we are not defined by our past, that we are empowered to choose our future, relinquish. Reactive patterns are automatic responses that arise when we face certain triggers, often without conscious thought or deliberate choice, relinquish. They are deeply ingrained habits of the mind and body, developed over time through repeated experiences, conditioning, and emotional memory, These patterns can manifest in many ways. Snapping back in anger during conflict, withdrawing in silence when criticized, or making impulsive decisions under stress, relinquish. What makes reactive patterns so powerful is that they bypass conscious reasoning, relinquish, operating almost on autopilot, relinquish, which can lead to actions and words that do not truly reflect our values or intentions. Relinquish. They are essentially shortcuts the brain has built to respond quickly, relinquish. But those shortcuts do not always serve us well in every situation, relinquish. Understanding them requires us to notice not only the outward behaviors, but also the internal signals that accompany them, relinquish, such as tension in the body, racing thoughts, or overwhelming emotions, relinquish. These patterns are not inherently bad. they may have protected us in the past, relinquish, helping us survive difficult circumstances or navigate stressful environments. But when they become the default way of dealing with everyday challenges, they can limit growth and harm relationships, Recognizing the nature of reactive patterns is about stepping back and seeing that much of what we do is not always conscious choice, but conditioned repetition, relinquish. And in that recognition lies the possibility of change. The role of self-awareness in breaking reactive patterns is foundational, because without awareness, change is nearly impossible. Self-awareness acts like a mirror, relinquish, reflecting back the truth of how we think, feel, and behave in real time, When we develop the ability to notice our reactions as they arise, we create an opportunity to pause instead of being swept away by impulse, relinquish. It means paying attention to our internal states, relinquish. Noticing the subtle cues in our body, such as a tightening in the chest, clenching of the jaw, or a sudden rush of heat that often signal an emotional reaction is about to take over, relinquish. Self-awareness also involves observing the thoughts that accompany these physical sensations, recognizing when they are fueled by fear, anger, or insecurity, By cultivating this awareness, relinquish, we become more attuned to the patterns that control us and less likely to fall into them unconsciously. Relinquish. It allows us to see not only the trigger, but also the story we tell ourselves in response to that trigger, And this recognition is what opens the door to choice, relinquish. Self-awareness is strengthened through practices like mindfulness, journaling, or simply taking time for reflection, all of which help us tune into the present moment instead of operating on autopilot. The more aware we become, relinquish, the more clearly we can see the gap between who we are in our reactions and who we want to be in our responses, And it is in that gap that transformation begins. Breaking the emotional loop begins with learning that interrupt the automatic cycle that takes us from trigger to reaction without conscious choice. The loop usually starts when something external, like a word, a look, or a situation activates an internal memory or fear, and almost instantly the body and mind respond with familiar patterns, It might be anger, defensiveness, shutting down, relinquish, or rushing into action without thought, relinquish. These loops are powerful because they are tied to strong emotions, relinquish. When emotions tend to override logic in the heat of the moment, to break the loop. One of the most effective tools is the pause. Pausing creates space, and in that space, the rational part of the brain can catch up to the emotional surge. Techniques like deep breathing, counting to 10, or even stepping away from a situation give us the chance to regulate our state before responding. Another important step is recognizing the specific triggers that repeatedly set off our loops. When we become familiar with those triggers, we are better prepared to anticipate them and engage with them differently. Reflection after the fact also helps relinquish, as looking back at situations where the loop took over can provide valuable insight into what was really happening beneath the surface. Breaking the loop does not mean suppressing emotions. It means acknowledging them without being controlled by them. It means choosing to respond with clarity rather than letting old habits. Shifting from reaction to response is one of the most powerful steps in breaking reactive patterns because it transforms how we engage with both ourselves and others. A reaction happens instantly, often driven by emotion, past experiences, or ingrained habits, while a response is intentional, thoughtful, and aligned with our values. The difference lies in choice. When we respond, we are no longer operating from autopilot, but from a place of clarity and awareness. Making this shift requires us to slow down and ask ourselves simple but powerful questions in the moment. What outcome do I want here? What matters most to me right now? And how can I act in a way that reflects that? This practice allows us to stay connected to who we want to be instead of being dragged into behaviors that create regret or harm. Responding rather than reacting also improves relationships. Because it communicates respect and emotional maturity. Instead of escalating conflicts, it opens the door to constructive dialogue, understanding, and connection. Developing this ability is not about denying emotions, but about channeling them wisely. Expressing them in a way that supports growth rather than destruction. Over time, the act of choosing responses over reactions strengthens self-control and reinforces a sense of empowerment, reminding us that we are not defined by our triggers, but by how we handle them. It is this shift that gradually rewires the brain, teaching it to choose intentional responses as the new normal, building new habits is essential for breaking reactive patterns because simply stopping a behavior is rarely enough. The old space needs to be filled with something healthier and more constructive. Habits are formed through repetition. When the same principle applies when creating new ones that support conscious responses instead of unconscious reactions. This process starts with identifying what alternative behaviors can replace the old ones. For example, instead of snapping in anger, one might practice taking 3 deep breaths before speaking. Relinquish. Instead of withdrawing in silence, one might practice expressing a simple, calm statement about how they feel. These small relinquish. When intentional acts may feel awkward at first, but over time they become second nature. The brain begins to rewire itself through consistent practice. Building new neural pathways that favor the healthier response. Creating rituals can also help reinforce these habits, such as daily journaling to reflect on emotional triggers. Mindfulness exercises to strengthen awareness, or gratitude practices to shift focus away from negativity. Another important aspect of building new habits is patience, because change does not happen overnight. There will be moments of progress and moments of setback. But the key is persistence and self-compassion. Celebrating small wins along the way provides motivation to keep going. While learning from missteps ensures continuous growth. The more we repeat the new behaviors, the more automatic they become, placing the old reactive patterns with responses that align with our goals and values. Sustaining growth there, breaking reactive patterns requires ongoing commitment because change is not a one-time event, but a continual process of reinforcement. Reactive new reinforcement. Reinforcement. Relinquish. It begins with consistency in applying the tools and strategies that helped create the initial breakthroughs. Such as mindfulness, pausing, and self-reflection. The more regularly these practices are integrated into daily life, the stronger they become and the less likely old patterns are to resurface. Sustaining growth also involves being intentional about the environments and people we surround ourselves with. Because supportive relationships and positive influences make it easier to stay aligned with new ways of being. Accountability, whether through trusted friends, mentors, or even journaling. When helps keep us focused on the path of growth and provides reminders of the progress we have made. Reflection plays a central role here, as looking back on past triggers and responses helps us see how far we have come and where we still need to improve. Another key factor is resilience, the ability to keep going even when setbacks occur, because no journey of change is free from challenges. When we stumble, the important part is to return to the practices rather than give up, understanding that growth often happens in cycles rather than straight lines, Over time, these sustained efforts create a deeper sense of emotional balance, stronger self-control, and a greater alignment between our actions and values, allowing the new patterns to become the natural way we navigate life.